Hey there, welcome to the Confident Communications Podcast. I'm your host, Molly McPherson. Now, I've been itching to talk about this topic for a while now. This week, let's talk about public relations. But the side of PR you might talk about over dinner or drinks. Or, okay, maybe that's just me. As I'm recording this intro, I'm headed off to Martha's Vineyard for my annual girls trip. We stay at a friend's house on Chappaquiddick, so we always talk about current events, pop culture, and of course, a Kennedy story thrown in there. And because all of us have worked in public relations at one time or another, we always get to the down and dirty fast, and it is a blast. Just like this interview, my guest today is Gary Schneeberger, and I discovered that we are cut from the same cloth, both from the Midwest, and also we both have decades of work in journalism and public relations. Gary spent more than 15 years as an award-winning reporter and editor for newspapers coast to coast, including the Los Angeles Times. And now he works in public relations as the founder of Roar, which is the best name in PR ever. He brings a lot of interesting stories into the mix, and some of which you're going to hear in today's episode. Gary has a book titled Bite the Dog, Build a PR Strategy to Make News That Matters. And I'm going to link to the book in my show notes. It's such a great name for a book. This book offers a lot of helpful tips for people who work in PR, but also for people who may need it. Now, before we get to Gary, this episode is brought to you by my new online platform that has recently launched, the Confident Leader Network. It is the place for learning how to be an indestructible leader when communicating in the modern age. The Confident Leader Network offers monthly trainings in how-tos in communication, reputation management, and social media to give you the confidence to use online media and social media platforms like LinkedIn, which is going to be one of our topics next month. So you'll gain all the insights you need to be more visible online, mitigate any crises that are coming, and managing your reputation, and all of it in a language that you will understand. The membership also comes with live online office hours where you can meet with me online in a group, in a cohort, and it's an AMA Ask Molly Anything. So check it out now at theconfidentleader.network, or you can go to my website, mollymcpherson.com/network, and you can also see the link in the show notes. Now let's get to Gary. Hello, Gary, and welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here. I heard an earlier guest said it was a delight to be with you, and you said it was the first time. So I don't know if pleasure's the first time or the third time, but it is indeed a pleasure to be here.
Well, Gary, you're a PR person. You should have come up with another word to put yourself at the top. Like it's an amazing, extraordinary, once in a lifetime.
It is the highlight of my professional career.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And they say PR people aren't honest. Gary, well, thanks for joining me today. I love speaking with PR people because you immediately kind of get into this pattern and rhythm of someone that kind of knows what the world is like. And that's why I wanted to bring you on the podcast, because you are the president and chief leonine officer of Roar. That's the name of your firm?
That is correct. Yes.
And with a great slogan of
Be Heard. And the reason I am Chief Leonine Officer, that just means like a lion, is that our brand is a lion, is a roaring lion. We say it's in order to be heard, sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's necessary to blow the other guy's hair back a little bit.
Oh, okay. Well, very colorful words, which matches your book that you published called Bite the Dog, Build a PR Strategy to Make News That Matters. Very colorful language.
Thanks. It was, it's funny. I've been writing for a living for 30 plus years, and that's the first book I ever did. So it was funny. I walked into the experience thinking this is going to be really simple because I've been writing for so long. There's no way I can. And it was the hardest thing I ever did. So completely different writing a press release or writing a news story as a journalist than it is writing a book. but it got done.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as PR people, we have to get to the point quickly, and a book, you get there somewhat quickly, and you have to fill it with anecdotes and lessons learned, of course. And your book, I breezed through it quickly, not because it's such a small read, but it's a very interesting read because I felt it's very topical. You speak about topical events, which is perfectly in alignment with what I talk about as well. Could you explain to me the term "bite the dog" and what it means to you?
Sure. I was a newspaper reporter for 15 years before crossing over into the dark side of public relations, as all journalists like to say. And my first job as a cub reporter, I was instructed by the veteran cops reporter. I was the backup courts and cops reporter. And what he told me, his name was Gary Metro, which is the best newspaper name I've ever encountered.
Yes.
It was my first newspaper job. So if you're listening, Gary, you still have the best newspaper name I've ever encountered.
Was he an editor? I have to ask, was he an editor at the Metro desk?
He was not.
Okay.
But he was the first chair courts and cops reporter for the paper.
Okay.
And as he took me under his wing to instruct me what to do, he said, when you're going through the police blotter, when you're out looking for stories, you don't want stories in which dogs bite men. Because the argument is dogs have been biting men ever since the two species got a look at each other. What you want to find are stories where men bite dogs. Now, he didn't, okay, if it actually happened literally, that would be cool. But he meant those kinds of stories, because men don't bite dogs every day. So if you're looking for stories, if you're looking to make news, or as I say, if you're looking to commit news, the way to do it is to bite the dog, is to upset expectations, to do something a little bit differently. That's the definition of being newsworthy.
And I like the example you had in your book about the Chicago Cubs winning the World Series. It wasn't that the Cubs won the World Series. It was that.
Yeah, they hadn't won the World Series in 108 years.
There you go.
And it was, there were people who lived their entire lifetimes who died at 107 who never saw the Cubs win a World Series. That was a big deal.
Yes. And I lived in Boston when there was a very similar story with the Boston Red Sox. So we've seen that hook play over and over again. So Gary, tell me your opinion on the state of the media as we see it right now. What I like, when I was reading your book, I thought, man, it's like Gary stands in the back of the room when I speak, because I love that you mentioned about journalists, that journalists do have a bias. And you probably hear a lot as a PR person, because I certainly do, about the term fake news. And it just it comes out of the mouths of people, and like they sneer as they say it.
Right.
So there is this somewhat acrimony towards journalists right now, and the news media in general. Give me your thoughts on the news media right now.
I look at the press and I tell all my clients this, that somewhere on the spectrum between best friends forever on one end, spawns of Satan on the other end, is where most journalists fall. You don't want to cozy up too closely, because at the end of the day, their job is not to pamper you, is not to do your bidding. So they're out to get a story, and you don't want to, be too friendly, too unguarded. At the same time, I don't believe they're fake news. At the same time, I believe most of them are fair. Here's what I said when I said in my book that they are biased. We're all biased. I remember being, sitting in court covering a trial and hearing a grandmother on the stand talk about how she was assaulted by the guy who was on trial. And I'm sitting there as a 21-year-old, brand new, freshly minted reporter, and I'm going, that guy's guilty. That guy's guilty. But when I got back and wrote my story, I didn't say that. And I made sure I went out of my way, even though I was biased personally, to be fair professionally. I gave the defense good quotes, as many good quotes as I gave the prosecution. That's where I think most journalists fall, is that they are fair. That's all you can ask for. If you're going to quote the best thing my opponent or the person on the other side of the issue says, then quote the best thing I say. Where it gets into problematic territory is if the gold star quote from the other side gets in there and the dumb thing that came out of my mouth gets in there, then you're not being fair. But most folks are being fair. One point to make, Molly, I think it's really important, is that this does not apply to, on the right, Sean Hannity, on the left, Rachel Maddow, and folks like them. They get paid to have opinions. They are commentators. They are analysts. They are not reporters. So when people point to Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow as evidence of bias in the press, they're mistaken, because those folks aren't reporters. They're not press in that sense. They're commentators. They get paid to have an opinion. Journalists who are reporting the news get paid not to have an opinion. Most of them will keep that opinion out of their stories.
And the seasoned reporters definitely know how to do it well. And you touch on the point exactly, Gary. I cannot give a talk without mentioning that point, because when fake news comes up, and it always does, whenever I'm with a client or if I'm speaking or I'm in a workshop and I'm asking for people's opinion,
Yep.
the lines are blurred. If someone is just on the air, they are considered a journalist.
Right.
And they're conflating an opinion with a news story. And I think this is the number one challenge, I think, for PR people and for reporters. And part of the reason why people distrust the press so much is they're confusing who the press really they're made up of, who they're made up of. Like, what is a reporter compared to a commentator? So it's good that you point that out in your book.
Yeah, I mean, it is I was a journalist, as I said. I was a reporter and editor for 15 years. And people want to say that the press is liberal. And, surprise, surprise, studies show that I think 70% of them identify as Democrats. Okay, that doesn't surprise anyone. That is as I would say, a dog bites man story, because that's just, you're fighting for the underdog, and that's fine. But to say that they're unfair, that they're biased, is just not the case most of the time. Will some of them do that? Yes. But the good ones, the ones who you really want to be covering your story, the ones you can kind of tell when you talk to them, they're going to put that bias aside, and they're going to just tell a story, and they're going to be fair, and they're going to give you a shot to say what it is that you want to say. And that's the beauty of doing what I do. I mean, with so much dissension in the culture right now, and if you're on social media, as I know you are, you see it all the time. People are fighting. We think we can change each other's minds with screed. It's not going to happen. But in that environment, to be able to have a chance to speak views that may not be popular, or if they're not, with at least half the country, is an amazing thing. It's an amazing gift we've been given. And so having that perspective of saying, okay, the commentators may not say nice things about the viewpoints that I hold as an individual, the ideology I aspire, that I have, but the news stories, the fact that they're coming to you and they're asking you for your input on these things is remarkable, because in democracies, the side that's not in power isn't getting talked to at all. The side that has the unpopular opinions isn't getting talked to at all. So I just think, for me, truly, and this is not PR guy hyperbole. It's a thrill every day to wake up and see what's going on in the media sphere and find out how I can plug clients into it.
And today, many people, well, at least half the population, would say our dissenter in chief, President Trump, kind of belies a typical presidential communications. Tell me your thoughts on President Trump, the communicator.
Yeah, it's very funny. In my book, I avoided talking about President Trump for so long because he's just a very hot button issue. Those folks who love him, folks who don't love him, to talk about him, to say anything about him can be seen as either praise, where some people will be mad at you, or criticism, where some people will get mad at you. So I finally get around to it in the chapter on how to overcome crises and mistakes. And the thing I say about him is that the rules that apply to the rest of us in terms of the wise practice of public relations, for some reason, do not apply to Donald Trump. When he was running for president, there had to have been 8 to 10 times that he did or said something that I, as the wizened PR guy of 30 years experience, said, oh, that's it. Candidacy's over. I was wrong, obviously, 10 times. Because I don't believe what, the oxygen in his atmosphere is the same as the oxygen in our PR atmosphere. It just isn't. And I think what it comes down to is Donald Trump knows his base very well, and he does not practice PR in the sense that you and I practice PR, public relations. He practices public retaliations. He goes after people who he believes have attacked him, have marginalized him, and his followers, his supporters believe that too, and it works in that context. It has, and if it doesn't work for people who don't support him, what does he lose? And at the end of the day, they don't like him anyway. So what is the effect of someone reading a tweet from President Trump, being aghast at it? Are they really, really double secret probation, super not going to support him? No, they already don't support him. So he really loses nothing most of the time in that area. It's a fascinating case study. Someone should write a book about it when he's out of office. I just don't think it'll be me.
Yeah. Oh, people definitely will. And President Trump comes up a lot when I am out on the road and when I'm speaking with people. And I was just in Iowa speaking to a group, and this question came up about, well, what if President Trump, and I was surprised, most of the people in the room I assume would be Trumpers. And one man asked, well, why can he tell a lie and nothing happens to him? But you're telling us in the news that, you're telling us as spokespeople that we can't lie. And you are in alignment with me. It's that you cannot compare President Trump to anyone else, because in public relations, we have to message to our publics, like whoever your stakeholders are. But President Trump, at least I feel, in my opinion, if I were to write this book, is his public are his base.
Correct.
And so he knows that he just needs to speak to them. And the issue of him talking about the 4 congresswomen, when he told them to go back to the countries where they came from, that is typical President Trump rhetoric. That's not surprising. But I will admit, I'm a little surprised that he's getting a little bit more blowback than he's had in the past from Republicans. So I think it will be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, I think you and I agree that President Trump he is a one-of-a-kind communicator in terms of someone who's held that office.
Right. And one of the first things I tell clients when we start working together is, you see how Donald Trump does it? Now forget how Donald Trump does it, because it simply will not work for anyone else. I truly believe it is in the purest, most spot on use of the word. It is unique to him and him only, the way that he does it. I'm not saying it's right to do it that way, but it works for him. And anybody who tries to do it that way, if you are a business owner or an entrepreneur or an author, expert, speaker, coach, and consultant, and you want to speak to the news of the day, and you want to get on Twitter, and you have even if you don't have a decent following, and you say some of the things he says, as intense as those things are, as fiery as those things are, it's going to hurt you. I guarantee you it's going to hurt you. He's the only person I believe at the end of the day, it didn't sink his candidacy. And at the end of the day, we'll see what happens in 2020, but to see what the final chapter is that's written on that. But first advice to any client: study what Donald Trump does, take a look at what Donald Trump does, and then forget it ever existed.
Yes, that's good advice. Now, I think you and I would both agree that President Trump does have a certain sense of control of the interviews that he does. It may not go how he likes, but he's able to kind of pivot it back to him and get out saying whatever it is that he says. How can you, to the listeners, is there a secret to making sure that you are in control of the interview? If you're being interviewed by newspaper reporter, radio, or on a podcast, how can you stay in control as opposed to the reporter?
That is a great question, and I don't often say that. I have one client who, when he first started doing interviews, after every question, he said, "That's a great question." And I said, "Okay, if you say it's a great question after 9 questions, people it dilutes the effectiveness. So only use it for really great questions." So that was a really great question. And the answer to that question is, I can do more than suggest something. I can guarantee, Molly, right now, I can guarantee.
Okay, let's hear it.
I can guarantee how anyone listening can be in control of the interview that they're asked to do. Are you ready?
Ready.
Do the interview.
That's it?
That's it. Because here's the fallacy, that the reporter is somehow in charge of the interview. He or she is not. The source is. The reporter needs what you have to say in order to have content to report to his or her audience. So if you don't say anything, if you were to ask me a bunch of questions and I would just to sit here silent, you wouldn't have a podcast. I mean, you get another one, but you wouldn't have a podcast that involved me. You truly, if you do the interview, you can control the interview by going in there with an agenda. That's not a bad word. Going in there with your talking points, what you want to communicate, what your messaging is, what your important points are, and then speaking those. Now, you'll get asked questions. This question that you just asked me about, is there a secret to making sure you own the interview? If I didn't really want to talk about that, as a matter of fact, I really did want to talk about that. But if I didn't, I could say something, what I call the bump and run. It's a football term. But it's acknowledge the question and then sort of move on very politely to your answer. So I could have responded to that question with, Molly, that's really an interesting question, but I think the issue really is trundle down the point wherever I want to talk about. You can deflect those questions, again, not evasively, but to ensure that you're getting the opportunity to answer the way that you want to answer to advance your agenda for that conversation. This has been great. You and I have had a conversation. I haven't had to do any of that because my agenda for this conversation is to help people understand a little bit more about public relations and to talk with someone like you who, as I did research beforehand, I'm like, wow, she and I agree on a whole bunch of stuff. This is going to be fun. But if you do the interview, so many people are afraid and nervous that they're going to get pinned down by Mike Wallace in some kind of, firefight. And that's not the case. Even the most hostile questions can be graciously kind of set aside, and you can talk about what the real issue of something is. Yes, you'll get reporters who occasionally will come back at the question 3, 4, 5 times. I've been in interviews where I've politely not sidestepped, not avoided, I wasn't afraid to answer the question. That wasn't the question I was there to answer. And I found ways to touch on the answer, to shade around the answer, but really getting across what it is that I wanted to talk about. The best thing people can do, the thing that they must do when they go into an interview is have, what are the 3 things that you want to say? Have those written down. Have the number one thing you want to say. If you only get one, have it written down in 25, 15, and 5 words, because you may only get 5 words. I put a spokesperson one time on the set of the Tyra Banks talk show. He never got a chance to speak.
Okay. Hold on. Tyra Banks, I have to know the client that you got on the Tyra Banks show.
I was working for a nonprofit organization called Focus on the Family. I forget what the subject was, but the spokesperson was our vice president he was a co-host of the radio program. Focus on the Family has a radio program whose audience numbers in the millions. And he was part of a panel. There were like 4 or 5 guests. And if you ever watched Tyra's show when it was on, it was a bit of a free-for-all.
Well, it was. I still don't see how this guest fits into the subject matter. Unless you're telling me, was it about families? What was Tyra talking about that day?
It was some kind of family issue that he, as a psychologist, had some insight on. And he somewhat wisely chose to sit there and not jump in and get caught up in the fireworks. So,
oh my goodness.
But all that to say, know what you want to say. And if you don't have the opportunity to say it, then live to fight another day. But if you do have the opportunity to say it, it may be the only thing you get to say. If you only have 5 words to make that impact, go ahead and make that impact and say those things, but be prepared. And if you're prepared, you have no reason whatsoever to be nervous about it.
Right. Yeah. So there's so much to unpack there. One, I think you're like me. We always are looking for that Mike Wallace reference. But as time marches on, the room gets smaller and smaller of people who have any idea who Mike Wallace was. And we can't come up with the new Mike Wallace because, really the penetration of television news and network news is not as strong as it was before. So
Correct.
Maybe it's Tyra Banks. Who knows? I don't know.
And so many of the questioners now are the folks we were talking about earlier, the Sean Hannitys and the Rachel Maddows and those folks. And a lot of the interviews that you get now are echo chambers in some sense, right?
Right.
Is there you go on a liberal talk show or a conservative talk show, and you're a liberal or a conservative pundit, and you just kind of go there, and it's an echo chamber for your views. And then they have like one sort of designated other side person who comes on and is sort of good natured and talks about things. But there's not a lot of well-known people like Helen Thomas, right? The longtime White House correspondent who would be the first questioner at presidential press conferences. There's not a lot of folks like that.
Okay, so now it's two people. Yeah, two people who have passed. Yeah, so they're not they're not even alive anymore. Yeah.
All of your listeners have to go to Google now and check all that stuff out.
Yeah, Google Helen Thomas. Yes. Well, she was in The American President too, if people haven't watched that movie. But the difference is, and I don't know if you find this block for a lot of spokespeople or people who have to sit down for an interview, is fear.
Yeah.
They're scared, and we want to. And you're essentially saying, remove the fear and look at it as an opportunity
Absolutely.
to put out your message. Now, how would you define the difference between spinning a message or framing a message?
Oh, yeah. Spin is, there's an element, I mean, I hate the word because there's an implication in the word spin that you're being dishonest. And you're not telling the truth. And when I was talking earlier about bumping and running a question, I wasn't in any way advocating being dishonest. I was advocating saying what it is that you're for, rather than jumping into the agenda of maybe barking about what you're against. Putting forward what it is that you offer, and doing it in a way that what you do, regardless of what your business is or regardless of what your views are, how that makes a difference. And it's interesting that you talked about earlier, actually, before we started the conversation, you and I were talking, and you talked about how you love anecdotes. One of the things I always tell clients is always have 3 anecdotes to illustrate the impact or the need for their ideas, products, and programs, and to always speak when possible in stories, not statements. So I would say the difference between spin and framing is simply putting your best rhetorical foot forward. It's being mindful of your messaging. And a key point about this, Molly, is so many people, and I had to learn this as an author, and you think as a PR guy who wrote a book, I'd know this, but when I did my first interview for my book, I had, your book has a message. When you write a book, your book has a message, but your book's message is not your media message. Your book's message is different. You're going to a different audience. Your audience in an interview, and I listened to a podcast you had with Brad Phillips, and he hit it on the head. The audience isn't the press. The press is the pass-through. The audience is their audience. You want to get through them. So your messaging as an author isn't your book message. You need to translate it into a media message. Your messaging as a company isn't your mission statement. You need to translate that into a media message that will compel people who are listening to want to engage with you. So for me, framing is putting that message in the most alluring, engaging way to get people to want to know more about it, to buy your book, to reach out, to talk to you about your services, and here's a word that you don't hear ever really anymore in public discourse, to persuade people to your opinion. We are of the generation where we still remember when people tried to persuade each other and not cudgel each other with social media arguments. There is an art, and I think framing is the art of mustering an argument in a way that can persuade rather than degrade or explode.
Yeah, and well said, well said. And spinning is really from a more of a distorted view of the profession of PR,
right,
and how we're messaging, when truly what it is you're framing your message. You had pointed out about the writing down the words. I like hearing the 25 and 15 and 5 words. I've read a lot of media books and I've seen a lot of media trainers. I have not heard that before, or breaking it down. Tell me specifically why 25, 15, and 5.
Really, it helps you no matter the medium that you're speaking in. So if it's television or radio or print, and it helps you when you're in a situation of, like my former colleague was with Tyra, when there's a bunch of people screaming, it allows you to unfurl a bit at 25 words. If you have 30 seconds, if you only have 10 seconds, or if you're trying to get a word in before the break, right before and we're going to commercial, you have 5 words to say what it is you want to say. It allows you to be prepared to hit your mark when your mark presents itself. no matter how long that mark might be, even if it is, again, the only time you get is when the host of the radio program says, okay, we're going to break, we'll be back. And then you can jump in and say in 5 words, whatever it is that you want to leave people with.
Well, now speaking with your Tyra experience, I don't know if you classify that as a win or not, but I had mentioned the anecdotes, and the one anecdote that I loved in your book is when you spoke about Richard Hatch. And again, another throwback person, but Richard Hatch happens to be alive at the moment, but he of course was on Survivor. I believe the second. Was he on the first season or first?
He was the first winner. He invented how to win a cutthroat reality game for sure, the way he played Survivor.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So Richard Hatch, the last time in my mind of Richard Hatch is he served his prison time, in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So whenever we would drive back from the Cape, we'd always talk about Richard Hatch. But at any rate, I love the press release. Well, first, you have an example of a press release in your book that you wrote when he was appearing at an event.
Correct.
So tell me a little about the story, about the event, and how someone somewhat derailed it for you from a PR point of view.
Yeah, a client of mine created a festival, and it's ingenious. It's a festival of cover bands, and in fact, it's coming up this weekend. The third one is coming up this weekend. It's a festival of cover bands, and this is the first season. This Richard Hatch example that we're talking about.
Okay, wait, hold on. I know I'm going off topic for a minute, but when I hear cover bands, you mean so this is a festival where the only acts happen to be acts of specific cover bands. So give me an example, Gary, of some of the cover bands. Who are they covering?
Oh, Pink Floyd, the Rolling Stones, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Brad
so they're
Paisley.
good.
Yeah, I mean these are the region's top cover bands.
Okay.
And the one that's happening as we speak right now this weekend, there's going to be almost 60 bands on 5 stages for 3 days. But the idea was it's being held on an island by Lake Michigan. I live in southeastern Wisconsin, northeastern Illinois area. So on the banks of Lake Michigan in Kenosha, Wisconsin, my hometown, is a island called Simmons Island. So the organizer of the event, my client, thought, okay, we're going to call the event Tribute Island because they're tribute bands. And, what can we do for islands? Well, there's 2 ways you can go. You can go Gilligan's Island.
Yes, Gilligan's Island, yes.
And oddly enough, this client had brought Bob Denver, who was Gilligan when he was still alive, out. And there's only a couple folks who were still alive from that show, Ginger and Marianne, and they don't do public appearances much. So you can either go Gilligan's Island or you can go Survivor, because a lot of that happened on an island. So the decision was made to go Survivor, to have Richard Hatch be the host. And we brought him out here to be the host of the program. He's a great guy, by the way, not the, evil manipulative guy that he was playing a character. Who among us would not, within the rules, do what we could to win the show? But he came out, and it was, we got some attention for him being out at the show, and he was shaking people's hands, and he was great. But what happened was, it was the first year, and we had good cover bands, but, I had been trained, or I had trained my client, the owner of the company that brought the folks out, to speak to the press if he needed to, but mostly told everybody, just bring the press to me if they come out to the event. I'm there on site. Well, a reporter came out to cover the event, bumped into someone who was on our team who was not trained to talk to the press, and got asked a couple of questions. And the member of our team said, yeah, it's a great time. We're having great fun. It's going to be really good next year because we're going to get really, really, really good bands.
Ouch.
So, we read that in the paper the next day, and it's like,
it made the paper.
Yes. Oh boy. Yeah, it did. So I tried to unwind the clock a little bit. By the time it got to me, I heard about the quote. And by the time it got to me, I tried to unwind it with my quote, which was the last quote in the story. I forget exactly what it said, but it was to, sort of soften that blow a little bit. But what that quote, we're going to have really good bands next year, did is it made all the bands who played, I'm sure, feel disrespected. And the message it sent to fans who paid to come out, the thousands, tens of thousands of people who came out to watch the event, it probably made them think, well, gee, we got ripped off. I mean, there are better bands who could come out here. It's just not a good thing. And, it's funny, as a writer, I'll add this aside. I always love the idea of cover bands. And I wish that were possible for folks like me and you, is that we could go have a concert somewhere. We could sit down with a typewriter on a screen or a computer on a screen and just like, no, I'm going to do a little Hemingway. And we could just type out, some Hemingway on the screen in front of everybody. And we could just be cover writers. Wouldn't that be fun if we could make money that way?
In my head, I'm already thinking if I planned this island theme, I would have all the cover bands, of course, but then I'd have a special section in homage to Gilligan's Island where I'd have a cover band of the honeybees. Did you ever remember that episode?
Yes, absolutely.
When they sang in Mrs. Howell, they were the the honeybees, but
yeah,
that's the Gen Xer. I guess that's the Gen Xer in me comes out.
And it is, Molly. It is the biggest cover band festival in the U.S. I mean, truly, like 10,000 people come out to this thing. It's amazing how popular this is.
Oh, it sounds like fun. Oh, it does sound like fun. Now, the press release that you had for this event, and one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you about it is I love your press release for it. Or a media advisory. I mean, it's one page. And at the end, you have the who, the what, the where, and the when. Right. Perfect for the press. But then you have the why should you care? And it says, why should you cover? You could have made a cover band reference, Eric, if you want to be super clever. But you said, Hatch defined how to win a competition reality show, and he has many insights, so on and so forth. And he also was on Celebrity Apprentice. Right. And this is when Donald Trump was just elected. So you found the hook, or you found the story, the bite the dog story.
Right. The idea there was to give it. And you're exactly right to use hook. I love to tell clients what we want to do is put as many hooks on that line. So as we're dragging it through the media sphere, it's going to tag somebody. So if they're not interested in cover bands, but they are interested as a reporter in President Trump and someone who has insight on being behind the scenes when the cameras weren't rolling, and Rich had no problem talking about Donald Trump when the cameras weren't rolling. They could do that too. So that got us a little extra bit of interest. And again, that's part of my, our philosophy at Roar about how to commit news. And that is to meet expectations, exceed expectations, or upset expectations. And one of the things I think we did with that was exceed expectations. You knew that Richard Hatch was there because he was on an island and he won Survivor, but we're also going to go a little bit farther and tell you he'll give you some insight on Donald Trump if you want it too.
Okay. And how was the press coverage? Was it good?
It was good. I mean, we didn't set the world on fire, but we got it. What's interesting is my client, the sponsor, is a publisher of a magazine that's been in town for 40 years. In fact, the first place, talk about coming full circle, the first place that ever paid me to write was this magazine. So now I'm working again, and they're a client. It's really kind of a sweet symmetry. But the fact that the local newspaper put it on page one was remarkable because they're in competition for ad dollars with this client.
Oh, okay.
So that showed the newsworthiness of what was put together, and then what we sort of framed up to let people know, again, your audiences are going to care about this, even if you're in competition with the organizer, your audiences are going to want to know what's going on here. And that proved to be a successful argument.
Okay. Well, Gary, so I'm going to wrap it up here. And you've offered such helpful and amazing advice for people from a PR perspective, but also people who may find themselves as a spokesperson. And even so, we've been speaking about Richard Hatch and Mike Wallace and Gilligan's Island and Helen Thomas. So we don't want this podcast to sound like it's straight out of 1999 or 1969. Let's bring it into the future, or bring it to where we are right now. And if you were to consider yourself, a PR practitioner for the modern age or the digital age, what have you noticed in your years of experience that with the era of technology and online media, is there any trick that you have or any tip that you offer now for any type of PR, either as a PR practitioner or as a spokesperson for the new age of media that we're in?
That is, again, a great question, truly. I'm fortunate enough to have worked in this profession, both as a journalist and a PR guy, to see the creation of the 24-hour news cycle with CNN and that, kind of around the clock coverage. But now we see we still have the 24-hour news cycle, but now it churns in 24-second increments thanks to Twitter and other social media. So the opportunities to plug into those things, simple things like what's trending on Twitter, how do you plug into that? Google alerts are a great way to know what's going on in the press, and then to be able to contact that press or contact other press and say, hey, this is going on right now. We had this happen with a client who has written a book on protection measures for women who, especially when they travel. And we've seen in the last several months those horrible stories in foreign countries and even in the U.S. of women who are, calling for a ride share and getting attacked. And we leveraged that news coverage in that 24-hour news cycle happening in 24-second increments. We leveraged that into a placement in the New York Times. There are opportunities every day. The beautiful thing about my job, the great thing about my job is that I don't know every day what are going to be the opportunities for my client roster until I wake up and I see what's going on. There's one today. I have a client who is the number one opponent in sports, what's called tanking. The idea that teams want to not necessarily win now in order so they can get, draft picks. Well, just today, a pitcher for the Houston Astros came out and said, a star pitcher came out and said, too many teams are trying to lose today. Well, now sports talk radio is going to be lit up, especially in Houston, talking about this issue. I can reach out to sports talk radio folks in Texas and offer my client, who's a former general manager of the Cincinnati Reds and has written a book on how to revamp the draft process so we no longer reward teams for doing less than their best. So that's the kind of stuff that every day is an opportunity to see what's going on in the culture and in the media, and then find opportunities to leverage that in order to get some attention for a client.
Yeah, that's it. So one of your clients was a GM, a baseball GM of the Reds?
Correct. Yeah, his name's Brad Coleman. He was GM of the Reds.
Okay. Now, out of curiosity, when the tanking story came out, I think it was like a week ago or so ago, did you think to call him to get a quote or to put him in the mix?
Yeah, we have gotten him. It's funny. I tell clients when I on-ramp with them, it's going to take a while to build an infrastructure, so don't expect big placements. Brad and I started working together about 1.5 to 2 years ago, and I told him that whole preamble so that he doesn't expect big things right off, because we have to build an infrastructure. We have to be able to assess what's going on a regular basis, and then, go out and get news. And within 2 weeks, we got him an op-ed in the Washington Post. Oops.
What? Oh, wow.
because someone on the Green Bay Packers, somebody suggested when Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback of the Packers, got hurt, the Packers should tank the rest of the year. We jumped on that. Brad wrote an op-ed because he is the guy who says, change the draft. The team that gets the number one draft pick, the team who gets the number one draft pick should be the team who has the best record but just misses the playoffs. Reward effort. So that became an op-ed there. So yeah, he's toured the country coast to coast on talk radio, sports talk radio. What we look for each time is it pops up in new, fresh ways. We look to plug him into that.
Oh, that's the sweet spot of PR, isn't it? Is when you have a client that has a solid message, an easy to understand message. And if there's any type of story that you can connect the dot, no matter how far apart it is,
yep,
you can make that connection. And and this is one thing I noticed in today's media environment, compared to, let's say, 15 years ago, there are more media opportunities. There's a plethora of media opportunities. He could be on the phone all day or doing interviews online all day. So there's a lot of opportunities as a PR person.
Absolutely. It is no longer the most influential outlets aren't in high rises in New York. Some of the most influential outlets are in somebody's spare bedroom, right? Is in someone's living room. It's everybody's their own publisher. Everybody's their own producer. There are so many more opportunities to plug clients into places, and those places have increasing influence, like you and your podcast.
Oh, Gary, look at that. So thank you so much. That wasn't a spin at all. You have framed that perfectly. Well, Gary, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. You brought some very valuable advice and just very easy to understand advice, breaking down that fear and how to make public relations and getting on camera or speaking to a reporter easy in these bite-sized pieces. So speaking of bite, so your book, Bite the Dog, Build a PR Strategy to Make News That Matters. I assume it's on Amazon, correct?
It is indeed. And Barnes & Noble and other places where fine books and even not so fine books are sold.
So, well, I will make sure to include a link for any of our listeners who want to buy your book. I'll include the link in the show notes. And Gary, you're, of course, the president and chief leonine officer.
That is correct.
Okay, of Roar, which is Be Heard. And I'm sorry, this is where my mind goes. When I hear Roar, I think of Katy Perry. Wouldn't it be great if you had that song? Did you ever think about that song?
No, because I don't know that my ideal client is a Katy Perry fan. And if I may I mention my website? Our website?
Of course. Is it katyperry.com?
It is not. They would find something besides good PR advice at katyperry.com, but they can find good PR advice and all the services we offer and some client testimonies and all kinds of good stuff like that at weroar.la, which I use to stand for Los Angeles because I have done marketing work for the film community. And I still have an office in Los Angeles, but .la does not actually mean Los Angeles. It's the country code for Lithuania. But anyway, it's weroar.la.
Okay, reroar.la. I did not know of the LA extension. That's interesting. Okay, well, Gary, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. That was a lot of fun. It's always good to talk to another PR person about fun PR events.
Very, very fun. Thank you for your great questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Gary. I want to thank Gary for sharing his stories and his wisdom from his experience working in news and public relations. You can find a link to his book, Bite the Dog, Build a PR Strategy to Make News That Matters, in the show notes. That's it for this week's edition of the podcast. I hope you're feeling just a little bit more confident. Bye for now.